Hi, fantasy readers. This is Corinne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. Today's story is a fun young adult adventure story with dystopian undertones and unique magic. It's written by Julie C Gilbert, a high school chemistry teacher who writes fiction, nonfiction, and fictional nonfiction. I actually find that last one so fun, and I'm picturing her creating chemistry textbooks for an urban fantasy series. I'll have to look up her fictional nonfiction now to see how close I am. She also can't pick a favorite genre, so she writes in mystery, sci-fi, fantasy, chemistry, writing, thriller, young adult, and more. You can find her drinking tea or foofy coffee while listening to audiobooks on long walks. Today's narrator is Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from both the author and the narrator, as well as how to enter our giveaway. For now, please enjoy The Golden City Captives by Julie C Gilbert.
Chapter 1. The Mountain Flames. The fireflies swept down the hill in a gorgeous, undulating wave until the whole forest above the village of Stillwater appeared to be on fire. Up and down the dirt-covered street, people stuck their heads out of doors and windows, transfixed by the sight. The golden stream flowed closer by the second, heightening the anticipation. Legends, promises, and prophecies filled every mind in a jumble of excitement. Ko wondered what the gods had in store this time. The people of light, the Gantari, had finally decided to choose their champions. Every youth secretly hoped he or she might be one of the lucky few to experience the wonders of the Golden City, where people didn't go hungry and the streets shimmered with gemstones. Ko tried to picture his mother in the soft silks city women supposedly wore. He imagined working for a wealthy prince, maybe tending his horses or feeding his sheep. If he was good, the prince might sponsor him so he could earn a commission in the king's army or apprentice to a blacksmith or pick up some other respectable trade. The strongest, bravest, and most beautiful of the youths raced into the street, puffed out their chests, and waited for the fireflies to inspect them. Ko longed to go with them, but a glance back at Mother doused his daydreams. Her expression made no sense. It mixed terror and heartbreak. He'd only seen an expression like that one other time in his life, the day the village watchman brought back his father's body and left it across the doorway of their one-room home. Ko didn't want to think about that time. He turned back to the commotion on the streets. The lights zipped around Carmichael and Bree before moving on to Jorash and Kame. Some of the lights stayed near them, but most moved on. His friend, Clara Mills, waved from next door before a large hand pulled her back through the window. Ko saw a large section of lights break off from the rest and approach his house, but he never suspected they'd show any interest in him. At 12, he figured he didn't have much chance of being chosen. A single firefly separated from the new pack and flew in close, practically touching Ko's nose. He waved it away. This close, he could see its face. The features were human only in miniature. Fire fairies. He'd always wanted to see one up close. The delicate creature wore shiny green armor with a spiked breastplate and matching helmet. He bore no weapons, but Ko's skin tingled, indicating a strong magical presence. The fairy's lovely, translucent wings beat the air furiously. The fairy held his hands in front of his body, then clapped twice. He emitted a single, high-pitched noise that had Ko clamping his hands over his ears and leaping away from the thing. Suddenly, thousands of fairies surrounded him, encasing him in a cocoon formed by their bodies. Ko thrashed at the sides, but though he could see through the capsule, he might as well have been fighting the wind. Mother gasped and rushed forward, but a new wave of fairies held her back. She screamed and reached for him, but the case surrounding him muffled the noise. The case drew tight across Ko's shoulders and pressed down on his head. He shuddered and tried not to breathe. Realization seeped through his numb mind as a ring of fairies banded together and encircled his wrists and ankles, pulling painfully tight. Ko looked desperately at his mother as horror and truth slammed into him. These fairies had come only to capture and enslave people. Ko saw his mother fall to her knees and pray for deliverance. Then the fairies reached out and touched the capsule. His vision clouded, and his lungs felt like they would burst. He clenched his eyes shut, but little starbursts of light flashed behind his eyelids. Pain mounted in his head, along with a steadily growing ringing in his ears. When he thought his head might shatter, suddenly the capsule burst, dumping him onto cold, wet grass. The rich, damp smell calmed him some. Muffled pops followed quickly by thuds announced the arrival of more captives. Ko forced himself to roll onto his back so he could sit up and cast his gaze about frantically, trying to locate his mother. His wrists and ankles still wore bands of interlocked fire fairies. Testing the strength of those bonds only resulted in sore wrists and ankles. The only people he saw were other children from his village. He couldn't see much beyond this small clearing. Here, the light from the fire fairies showed him the grass and a few of his neighbors, but beyond lay absolute darkness. Water seeped through his pants, leaving him chilled. As he took in his surroundings, Ko noted that even the stars couldn't penetrate the intense light from the fire fairies. A dozen children screamed, cried, or called out questions, but nobody answered. "What are you doing?" demanded a male voice. The harshly delivered question caused most captives to fall silent. Ko had never heard such an accent before. The words came out clipped and short, like the speaker feared he'd run out of time to speak. The man stepped out of the darkness into the circle of light, almost treading on one of the children. "This wasn't the agreed-upon meeting place." A fire fairy dropped down from the circle above, growing in size and stature until she was about the size of his mother's water kettle. Movement from her delicate wings caused a gentle breeze to touch Ko's face and allowed this new fire fairy to hover above the crowd a few feet from the man. White flowing robes encased her body, long brown hair hung to her waist, a flower crown perched on her head, giving her a regal air. Her chin inclined upward. "We want answers first," said the fairy. Her voice rang out, reaching every ear. "Why is the demand for captives suddenly so high?" The man glared at the fire fairy and shook his fist at her. The movement caused his cloak to fall back, revealing a small patch high on the right side of his chest. The symbol woven into the fabric featured a winged golden creature. "Do not forget your place, Forest Witch." His voice was pitched low, carrying extra threat. "You know whom we hold. Do your job, take your payment, and don't ask questions." The fire fairy froze with her gaze fixed on the man. Ko could tell a struggle happened inside of her, but only flickers of it showed up in her expression. Finally, she nodded stiffly and let her eyes fall shut. "That threat is getting old," said the fairy. "But it's still effective," the man reminded her. He grinned, reached into his cloak, and pulled out a small pouch. He shook it gently, then tossed it onto the ground. "Here is a gesture of goodwill from my master. I'm told it's fresh." The bag hit the ground, and a small puff of bright yellow dust shot upward. The fairy eyed the package, looking stricken. Ko thought she might cry. Slowly, she raised her hands and made a waving gesture. "Take them, then, but tell your master he has them all now. There are no more children of promise to be found in these lands. He must release the queen." "He'll do what he likes, and you'll follow orders if you value her life." "It has been 14 years!" cried the fire fairy. "One more and she will die without us, as we will without her. We have done everything asked of us." "I don't make those decisions," replied the man. His haughty attitude drained away, and he suddenly looked worried. Shaking himself, the man drew his shoulders back. "The rest of the payment's at the rendezvous. I'll have some men deliver it as soon as the prisoners are secure." He opened his mouth to say more, but then shut it firmly, spun on his heel, and strode out of the light. Ko didn't have a lot of time to consider the strange exchange. More men stepped into the circle of light and picked up the children. The fire fairy bonds were replaced with rough rope cords. Those who fought back were knocked out with swift strikes. Ko kept himself still as they hauled him up and loaded him into the back of a large wagon waiting just outside the light. Ko's breath left in a hurry when something small slammed into him. "Where have you been?" hissed Clara Mills. She tightened her grip around him, pinning his arms to his chest. Her neck craned back to look at him. "We have to get out of here." A sword clanged off the side of the cage, followed by a grumpy order for quiet. Clara let go and drew Ko into the center of the crowd where they could talk. Small conversations buzzed around them. Ko stumbled, hampered by the ropes around his legs. Unlike the fairy bonds, which had kept his ankles locked together, the rope bonds allowed about 6 inches of movement at a time. "How did you get free?" Ko demanded. "They weren't that tight," Clara said with a shrug. Her voice, though quieter than before, still zipped out with her usual frantic pace. "I just slipped them off. Don't worry, I'll put them back on if we're still here later. But we shouldn't be here later. We need to get out, now." Clara reinforced the sense of urgency by squeezing Ko's right hand painfully. "Calm down," Ko ordered. He leaned toward her and resisted the urge to pull his hand free. "We're in trouble, but at least we're together." Clara swatted his hand. "Do something!" Her expression flickered between worry and hope. Ko regarded his friend curiously. "Why are you looking at me like that? I'm in the same cage you're in." Clara clung to his hand, but avoided his gaze. "You know those weird dreams I get sometimes?" Ko nodded. "Well, last night I had one, and it featured you," said Clara. "Me? What about me?" "You were in a large arena, and so was I. We were bound to large stakes." Her voice shook slightly as she delivered her report. "I was there, but I wasn't the focus. You were. If that's the future, Ko, we need to change it." "Why? You want to be the center of attention?" "Ko, please. This is serious. I don't often get much of a sense for a dream, but I know this. If we enter that arena, everything will change forever." Finishing the report seemed to exhaust Clara. She shut her eyes to rest. Ko pulled her close and let her fall asleep. Adjusting his position, he cradled his friend as best he could, despite bound hands. She confused him. Although the same age as Ko, Clara often spoke with wisdom far beyond her years. Her dream gift had always fascinated him, even if the foresight often changed little about the future. Chapter 2. The Selection. Shortly after dawn, an increase in the murmurs told Ko their journey would soon end. A quick check confirmed the feeling that they neared their destination. He hadn't slept a wink, preferring to spend the time thinking. He nudged Clara awake. "Put the ropes back on," he instructed. "We're almost wherever they're taking us." Clara's eyes snapped wide. Quickly, she worked her feet back into the loops meant to restrain her and slipped her hands back into the bonds that would attach them to her waist. Whomever had tied her up had wanted to be thorough. The man hadn't counted on Clara being able to work her hands free. Ko was glad his captor had gotten lazy or run out of rope. His wrists were raw from the coarse cords, but at least he could move them away from his body. When they entered the city, Ko immediately felt the change as the wagon wheels left the rough dirt roads and slid onto a smooth path paved with bright red bricks. Chatter from a busy market reached him, along with the scent of freshly baked bread. Ko's stomach rumbled, reminding him he hadn't eaten in hours. The city was alive, but the streets along their path remained strangely deserted, save for the stoic soldiers watching from the walls that separated the city sections. Occasionally, Ko would spot furtive movement near a window or catch a glimpse of a shade being pulled shut. Once a small child leaned out a window and stared down at them solemnly, waving a sad farewell to them. A woman wearing bright red silks pulled the child back. Ko and Clara exchanged questioning glances. They worked their way to the edge to get a better look, but the move only gained them a closer look at the heavy brick walls they passed. They'd maneuvered to the back as well, and Ko caught sight of another horse-drawn wagon lumbering up behind them. Two men dressed like the man who'd spoken with the fire fairy rode horses in between the two prisoner transports. Both wagons pulled into a large, beautiful courtyard that boasted a huge fountain in the center. The children pressed themselves against the cage bars and gaped at the watery spray bubbling up out of the fountain. Ko had never seen anything like it. His parched throat ached to taste the water. He couldn't take his eyes off the fountain until the wagon finally turned around the right side of the massive dwelling, leaving it behind. Even then, it filled his mind's eye until an urgent tap from Clara refocused him. He hadn't realized the wagon had come to rest before a dark, foreboding building. The prisoners were hustled out of the wagons and into the building. They went quietly, having spent their anger and tears somewhere on the long ride. Ko couldn't hold Clara's hand, but he made sure she walked in front of him so he could keep an eye on her. His head felt light from lack of food, but since that feeling was familiar to him, he paid it no mind. Soldiers herded them inside and positioned them in two straight lines. Ko and Clara found themselves in the middle of the front row. As such, they had a perfect view as the prisoners from the other wagon marched in at sword point. Ko's heart sank when he saw his mother among the last to step through the doorway. "Where is Clara's father?" Ko wasn't sure whether to be glad to know Mr. Mills had avoided the roundup or worried about him. The man who had spoken with the fire fairy stepped through the doorway and tugged on a rope next to the door. Large, heavy drapes drew back from massive banks of windows, flooding the room with light. The man then addressed the adults huddled in small groups near the door. "Find your children," he ordered. When nobody moved, he added, "Any unclaimed child will be killed." That got them moving. Ko's mother practically smothered him. The same thing happened to every other child, except Clara. She stood next to Ko, trembling but trying to remain brave. Everybody held their breath. Before the men could pull Clara out of line, Ko felt his friend slam into his side as his mother drew her close. "She's mine," declared his mother. "They're both mine." "Is this true?" The lead captor addressed the entire crowd. Ko heard nothing and sensed no movement. Finally, a man cleared his throat. "Aye," said the man. "How did the girl come to have such fair hair?" asked the lead soldier. Ko grew very conscious of the dark color of his hair, which matched his mother's perfectly. "She favors her father," Ko's mother answered. "My first husband died of a fever, and my second husband died by the sword." He was suddenly grateful Clara looked a few years younger than him. While the man considered whether or not she spoke the truth, the door opened and every soldier stiffened. The two men who would have killed Clara scrambled to the left side, saluted by bringing their right fists up to their left shoulders, and studied the ground. The lead soldier stood taller. The new man had a commanding presence magnified by ornate, deep red robes, heavy. Gold bands lined the collars and wove back and forth across the front, making the robe look like cracked glass. "Captain Dominic, what is this rabble doing standing here?" The man's voice snapped the rebuke. "Forgive me, Lord Ewald. There was some confusion over the lineage of one of the youths," Captain Dominic explained. Lord Ewald waved the explanation away. "Never mind. Summon more men. We'll do this here. Just be quick about it. My daughter will arrive soon, and I want nothing to disturb her. Do you understand?" Yes, my lord, Captain Dominic said. He turned to the man standing on his left and issued an order that echoed what Lord Ewald had just dictated. When Sarah enters, have them kneel, Captain. She will make her choices. Those can be properly stored. Take the rest to the market and fetch me the best price possible. As you say, so shall it be, the captain said, accepting the order. Keo felt his mother's whole arm tremble as she drew him closer still. And move the adults off to the side and keep them quiet. I don't want Sarah distracted, said Lord Ewald. The soldiers hurried to complete the order. Several cries rang out as parents were forced to release their grips upon their children. Keo's mother let go, but not before squeezing his hand reassuringly. She walked after the others before the soldiers could lay hands upon her. Lord Ewald started pacing in front of the lines of children. What could be taking so long? How long does it take to get dressed and answer a simple summons? As the questions weren't addressed to anyone, nobody answered. Keo and the other children tried to stand still, but the tension made them fidgety. Every slight movement drew baleful glares from the guards. At last, the door swung inward. A young soldier entered and held the door for a small figure. Keo hadn't known what to expect, but the delicate girl who swept gracefully in took him by surprise. He couldn't judge her age very well, but he guessed she might be a year or two older than him. The light blue gown hugged her body close, but the sheer cloak that accompanied it, draped from her shoulders, looked like fairy wings. "You're late," groused Lord Ewald. "I apologize, Father. My hair took longer than expected to fix. Please forgive me." The girl glided up to Lord Ewald and placed a hand affectionately on his arm. Her light, lively voice fit her very well. The hair she spoke of indeed appeared to have taken some time to arrange. The long blonde tresses had been swept up, braided, and artfully pinned up around her head, leaving only select strands to hang down next to her face. Keo liked her for no good reason. Not enjoying the reaction, he scowled. Lord Ewald's features softened, but he cleared his throat and spoke gruffly. "Very well, but don't let it happen again." Lord Ewald turned to the captain and barked an order. "Get them kneeling." "That's not necessary, Father," said the girl. Nevertheless, the soldiers scurried to do as bid. Somebody kicked Keo's right calf, causing his legs to buckle. Strong hands guided him down. He landed hard upon his knees with his bound hands resting in front of him. Frightened squeaks and muffled cries of pain rang out up and down the line. Lord Ewald rubbed his hands together in anticipation. Then he stepped behind the girl and placed large, ring-covered hands upon her shoulders. "This is the moment. Choose wisely, my child." Dipping her shoulders, the girl slipped free of her father's grasp and walked to the right side of the prisoners, off to Keo's left. She circled the whole group before starting around again, this time pausing in front of each captive. When she reached Keo, she stopped and knelt, looking him deep in the eyes. He tried to look away, but her right hand reached out and briefly touched his chin. A spark of power from her hand set his teeth tingling. Her eyes widened, but otherwise she didn't react. Standing, she moved on, stopping at several others. Finally, she completed one more circuit and returned to where she'd started. "Have you made your choices about which ones might have magic in them?" Lord Ewald demanded impatiently. "I have." Gesturing to Keo and Clara, she added, "That boy and girl have the divine touch upon them, but I do not know whether that means what you hope it means, Father." "Excellent. Thank you, my dear. You may go now." Lord Ewald's tone made the suggestion an order. "May I return and see them in private later?" asked the girl. "I might be able to gain more insight when we're alone." Keo knew Lord Ewald wanted to deny the request, but her last statement convinced him. "Keep your visit short," Lord Ewald said. "I'll have Captain Dominic arrange something for you." He looked pointedly at the captain. "Secure the ones she selected and find their parents." Clear the rest of this rabble out. He hesitated. See if Lady Arvista wants any of them for the household staff before you take them to market. Once again, Ko felt strong hands fall upon him. The children around him shrank away. He didn't know whether to be grateful the girl had chosen him or envious of those headed for the slave market. He watched helplessly as his mother was culled from the group of adults and whisked away. The terrified expression on Clara's face broke his heart, too. Chapter 3. A Terrible Choice. Ko was locked in a small cage with Clara in a similar situation on his right. He couldn't even stand up straight without hitting his head on the top, so he remained seated, leaning against the back bars in a doomed effort to find a comfortable position. Clara spent a few minutes pushing and pulling at the bars before lying down on the cold, hard ground. She couldn't quite lie flat, but if she bent her knees, she fit quite nicely within the tiny space. Ko took in the large room they'd been brought to. A row of 10 cages lined both walls, with a wide path between them. On the way here, Ko had been guided past a half-dozen doors spaced well away from each other. He assumed they too held 20 cages. He'd been disappointed to find that the other cages were empty. It would have been helpful to be able to question somebody more familiar with the place. "Oh, I'm scared," said Clara. "Why did she pick us? What is the divine touch?" One of the 2 guards standing outside their cages turned around and kicked the front of Clara's prison, causing them both to flinch. "No talking to each other." "Then you tell us," Ko demanded. With considerable effort, he maneuvered so that his face came close to the front bars. "Who was that girl? What was she looking for?" "I'm not telling you." "Don't torment them, Desmond," said the other guard. He spoke slowly, but his quiet voice carried a ring of command. "If you upset them, Lady Sarah's going to know about it." "I'm not afraid of that half-breed witch," snapped Desmond. "She can—" The other guard's hand shot out and slammed into the first guard's throat, cutting off further words and sending the man straight to the ground. "For your own sake, stop talking," suggested the calm guard. Red-faced, the guard named Desmond slowly picked himself up and glared at the other man. "Gentlemen, that will be enough," said Lady Sarah. She stood in the threshold with her hands neatly folded in front of her. A stony expression said she'd probably heard the entire exchange. "My father has granted me a short audience with the children bearing the divine touch. Kindly leave us and return in half an hour." Mumbling acknowledgments, the guards quickly marched out. As Lady Sarah stepped through, a servant girl came in on her heels, carrying a tray holding bread, fruit, and cheese, as well as 2 large mugs. Ko guessed the mugs held water, but at this point he'd have drunk anything. Clara scrambled around until she sat in a position much like Ko's, nose pressed to the bars. "Set the tray near the cages and leave us," instructed Lady Sarah. The servant girl dipped in a curtsy and obeyed. "Will there be anything else, milady?" asked the girl. Lady Sarah checked to see that the guards were out of hearing range before replying. "No, thank you, Lexi. Please go watch the door. I do not trust them not to return early. After you've signaled their approach, you may have your midday meal. I apologize for making you wait so long." "It's happy to help, I am." The girl's lilting accent lightened Ko's mood almost as much as the gentle exchange with Lady Sarah. Lexi curtsied again, deeper this time, then nodded at Ko and Clara before turning to leave the room. She shut the door behind her. Lexi had placed the tray halfway between their cages, but just out of reach. Lady Sarah bent down and moved the tray close enough for them to touch. Clara eyed the tray, then looked to Ko for a decision. He tried to think, but the hunger was making that difficult. "I am aware you do not trust me," said Lady Sarah. "Not that I blame you for that, but we haven't much time. If I prove the food is sound, will you listen to what I must say?" Ko nodded, and Clara did the same, though with a bit more enthusiasm. Picking up the loaf of bread, Lady Sarah broke it in half, ate a small piece from the middle, then handed a large chunk to each of them. Likewise, she proved that neither mug contained poison before handing them over. Convinced, they tucked into the food eagerly. Despite her impatience, Lady Sarah let them enjoy the food for several minutes before speaking. She passed these intervening moments by gazing out the room's single window. A skylight let in enough light to see by. When the last of the food had been consumed, Ko and Clara thanked the lady for her kindness. Ko knew the food was meant to buy goodwill, and it definitely worked. "Why are you sad, Lady Sarah?" Clara's question surprised Ko, but he hid it well, eager to hear the lady's answer. She'd been facing away from them for quite a while. The only sign of sadness was a dip in her shoulders. When she turned to face them, Ko saw the shine of unshed tears in her eyes. The lady attempted a smile, but the effort was dim at best. "Because I have a terrible choice to make." Lady Sarah dashed away some tears and drew a deep breath to gain some composure. Blowing out the breath in one long whoosh, she continued, "I need your help." "With what?" Ko asked. He didn't bother hiding the suspicion flavoring his tone. Lady Sarah gestured for patience. "First, let me answer the question Clara voiced earlier," said the lady. She drew close, pulled back the empty tray, and sat in the space cleared by removing the tray. "I chose you because you have the divine touch. That means there's a good chance you're a shapeshifter. My father and I hope this is so, though for vastly different reasons." "Why?" asked Clara. "How do you know her name?" Ko inquired at the same time. "I know both of your names, Ko," replied the lady. Her smile brightened for a moment. "It's part of the legacy of being a half-breed witch." They gasped, but she waved away their shock. "Of course I heard the guard. Do not concern yourselves with my feelings. What he said was true, in a way." Lady Sarah leaned closer and met both their eyes for a long second. "My mother is of the fair folk." "The Queen," Ko murmured, recalling the confrontation between Captain Dominic and the Fire Fairy. "Yes, my mother is Queen of the Seraphim. The people of these lands call them Fire Fairies," Lady Sarah explained. "To her people, Queen is more than a title. It's a position of power. Until her death and the rise of a new queen, she's the only one who can make the scony, which is simply called fairy dust. It enhances a seraphim's powers." Ko's mind made the appropriate connections. "That's how your father controls them." Lady Sarah's expression turned troubled. "I do not know everything that transpired, but in the years before my birth, there was a war between the Seraphim and the Gantari. One of my father's advisors betrayed her, allowing the Gantari king to capture her. That effectively ended the war because the traitor could not become the true queen while my mother yet lived. Instead, the Seraphim as a whole were enslaved, but before this was truly known, my mother was gifted to my father for his service during the war." "Why are you telling us this?" Clara asked, brushing away a tear. "You need to understand why I'm asking you for help and what I'm asking you to do," said Lady Sarah. "And the terrible choice I've made." "How can we help?" Ko wondered. "I believe the power I sense in both of you means you are shapeshifters, but I could be wrong. If so, then my plan is doomed." "Why would it matter?" inquired Clara, narrowly beating Ko to the question. "What's so important about shapeshifters?" Ko asked. "My father hopes you're shapeshifters so he can gift you to the king and improve his status among the nobles, but I want you to escape with my mother." Lady Sarah forged on with her proposal, speaking faster by the second. "Freeing her will release the fire fairies from their obligations to my father and give the resistance a chance to grow." "Why would you help the rebels?" Ko queried. He, of course, knew about the rebellion against King Agnor. It had been going on for his whole life. His father always claimed it was nothing more than malcontents making noise. "Because I must," Lady Sarah declared. She tugged at the sleeves of her ornate gown. "You may think this finery exempts me from suffering, but my mother's legacy ensures that I feel more than most. The slave markets are daily filled with a misery that's hard to define, and that is but one example of the wrongs that exist under this king. If I do nothing to counter my father's actions, my soul bears the stain of their blood." Her passionate speech resonated with Kao. "How can we help?" he asked. "No chains can hold shapeshifters for long," said Lady Sarah. "In 2 days' time, King Agnor is due to visit. My father will want to impress him, so he'll likely bring you two to the arena and force your first change." "How can he do that?" Clara wondered. Lady Sarah winced, and her expression turned troubled. "Triggers for a first change differ for every person, but generally it involves either pain or distress," she explained. "Father will likely threaten Kao's mother. If I had more time, I might be able to teach you how to change early. After the first change, you should have the ability to shift at will, but I'm afraid we'll have to wait for my father's method to work. I'm sorry about that. If the power I sense in you speaks true, chances are good at least one of you will be able to fly. You must carry my mother back to her people. She can show you the way." "If she is one of the fair folk, why hasn't she flown away already?" Kao asked. Tears pooled in Sarah's eyes, but she held them back. "She can't, or won't. The first thing my father did before making her his wife was to clip her wings. Without her people, they've never healed properly. And even if she does manage such a healing, there's still me. She won't leave while I'm here. I'm only half Fae. I may not ever grow wings." "That's awful," said Clara. "What will you do if we cannot shift or change into a form incapable of flight?" asked Kao. This time, the tears did fall. "I don't want to think about that." Lady Sarah drew a shuddering breath, and just barely kept from sobbing, though tears flowed freely now. "My mother has requested I still free her people, but I don't know if I can." Kao followed the logic instantly. Only 2 things could free the fire fairies from Lord Awald's control: restoring their queen or destroy her. Chapter 4: The Arena. Over the next 2 days, Kao and Clara spent many long hours in the cramped, uncomfortable cages, but they looked forward to each brief visit with Lady Sarah. During the half-hour sessions, she would let them out to stretch and eat. The guards were responsible for making sure they had regular reprieves, but Lady Sarah rightly didn't trust them. When the 3 of them were alone, they spent most of the time talking through the plan details, trading stories, and discussing various prophecies. They found Lady Sarah intelligent and devoutly religious. She had many personal theories about the One's plans for delivering the kingdom from oppression. Planning was difficult without knowing what manner of creature, if any, they would shift into. The lady's gift could only predict that their affinity for transformation magic would be strong, nothing more. Mid-afternoon on the second day, their visit got cut short by a loud trumpet blast. Lady Sarah stiffened and hurried to the window. Kao followed with Clara right by his side. As they reached her, Lady Sarah whirled and caught both of their shoulders. Her normally pale features looked extra ghostly in the cheerful light streaming down from the skylight. "Quickly, into the cages," said Lady Sarah. "The guards will be back any moment." Footsteps could already be heard in the hallway. Kao and Clara barely made it back inside before the door slammed open and an entire squad of soldiers rushed in. Lady Sarah stood with her back pressed against the cages to prevent the soldiers from seeing Kao and Clara's movements as they fumbled to snap the locks back into place. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded Lady Sarah. Her voice sailed high with the question. "You frightened me half to death." "The king has arrived," announced Captain Dominic. Kao couldn't see him through the fabric of Lady Sarah's maroon dress, but he recognized the voice. "Lord Awald sent me to fetch his prizes," continued the captain. "He also said you should return to your chambers to prepare for the reception." Lady Sarah suddenly jerked forward. "Let go of me!" she commanded. She suddenly sailed into a wall of 5 waiting soldiers. 2 grasped her elbows in a manner that both supported and restrained her. "My men will escort you to your chambers now. It's for your safety, of course, Lady Sarah." The captain's voice dripped with false courtesy. "Appearances must be maintained for the king." Now that Lady Sarah wasn't obstructing his view, Kao saw that Captain Dominic wore a fancy uniform with bright red pants and a shiny silver breastplate. His well-polished helmet had a long red and white feather sticking out of it. The rest of the men wore dark blue uniforms. Only 2 others had silver breastplates. Kao figured they must be officers. Struggling to free her arms, Lady Sarah tried to move forward. The captain's next words stilled her. "You may also wish to have a word with your mother. Lady Arvista's health has been unpredictable of late. She could take an ill turn at any moment." Anger brought some color back into Lady Sarah's cheeks. Her chest heaved with suppressed rage, and her hands formed fists. She gave the captain a tight, icy smile. Slipping free, she walked right up to the captain. "Thank you for your concern, Captain. It seems I have much to do today. I'd best hurry. Please step aside." Kao wanted to cheer. Captain Dominic looked like he'd swallowed something foul, but he stepped out of her way and watched her exit. His orders to his men were short and gruff, but unnecessary. They were already moving to unlock the cages and pull Kao and Clara free. The first precious second where nothing hindered Kao caused his heart to leap with the sheer joy of being outside the hated cage. A group of soldiers whisked him away to a room 3 floors down, where he was ordered into a large basin filled with warm water. A large, kind woman barked orders from behind a privacy screen, making sure he cleaned behind his ears and scrubbed his hair until it gleamed. It was the longest, most thorough washing Kao had ever experienced. Once he was finished, the woman rubbed a cool salve on the remains of the rope burns. Now clean and dry, Kao let the woman dress him in brightly colored, soft silks. The loose pants billowed around his legs. Likewise, the long, golden sleeves hung loosely on his thin frame. A bright red belt was clinched tight at his waist. She showed him his image in a large mirror, confirming his suspicion that he must look like a kite. Clara had been taken elsewhere, but Kao assumed she was receiving similar treatment. He could almost believe everything would be all right. Thoughts of Lady Sarah's plan seemed distant and unnecessary until the soldiers returned to escort him down to the reception hall. Kao listened as Captain Dominic delivered strict orders not to speak or do anything except endure inspection with a pleasant smile. Kao didn't feel much like smiling until he saw Clara. His friend looked like a princess. She wore a bright yellow dress, and her hair had been braided and pinned up around her head, much as Lady Sarah's had been the first time they met her. Together, Kao and Clara bore an hour's worth of being on display. They stood on a raised platform and nervously eyed the crowd. King Agnor and his advisors circled like birds of prey. They poked and prodded the children, discussing the finer points of their appearances. The women in the crowd held hushed discussions behind fancy hand-held fans. At first, the attention was intriguing, but it quickly grew tedious. By the end, Kao wanted to rip off the fine silks and run screaming through the crowd. Finally, at the end of forever, the king changed everything with a simple statement. "I'll admit they're fine specimens, Lord Ewald. Let us see what, if anything, lies inside these creatures. If it's truly remarkable, I'll grant you 3 more towns and 1 city of your choice." "That is most generous, my king," said Lord Ewald. "If they disappoint you, I will grant you use of my fire fairy army for a full year." The men shook on the wager, setting off a few frantic minutes of bets being placed. Kao's disgust grew every second he spent in these people's presence. When each man seemed satisfied with his wager, soldiers took Kao and Clara away to separate destinations again. This time, no warm bath awaited Kao. Instead, The soldiers quickly stripped away the silks and replaced them with simple brown trousers and a white shirt. They fitted his wrists and ankles with metal cuffs that linked them together with a sturdy chain. They brought him down to the back of the massive house where well-dressed people gathered in droves. Clara and her escorts were already waiting for them. She too wore simple clothes, though her shirt was a pale blue color that matched her eyes. Kao wished they hadn't bound her. Both children were lifted up into yet another cage. This time, solid gold rods formed the bars. The soldiers secured their chains to two wooden poles with rusty metal rings coming out at the top. The first bump as the wagon started moving almost knocked Kao and Clara off their feet. Clara sent Kao a nervous look. He wanted to reassure her, but he could barely maintain his balance as the wagon continued down the streets. Standing gave them an excellent view of the city as they wound through various sections, both rich and poor. Grim-faced people lined the paths. From time to time, Kao saw someone reach up and place two fingers on their foreheads between their eyes. It took him a while to identify the gesture as a sad salute and a tribute to the doomed. He wondered why they showed up at all, until he noticed the soldiers interspersed at regular intervals. Most of the population was captive in one form or another. The realization shattered the last of the good feelings left from the kind treatment they'd received in the afternoon. The kindness had almost convinced him this place could be the golden city of his dreams. He still had little confidence in Lady Sarah's plan, but he admired her for the conviction to stand against her father. They left the walls of the city behind and traveled the short distance to the arena, which sat next to the city like a large decorative egg. The arena looked big from the outside, but its imposing atmosphere was magnified once inside. The lack of a roof allowed the sun to bathe everything in the center in broad beams. The spectator stands rose up the same to every side except the far right, which held a magnificent viewing platform, obviously meant for the important people. A thick layer of fine yellow sand covered everything in the middle, preventing the horse-drawn wagon from getting far. Kao and Clara were unloaded near two tall pillars and led inside by a proud escort of officers wearing shiny breastplates. Kao couldn't look into them without squinting, so he shut his eyes and allowed his legs to follow the soldiers' directions. His heart fluttered when he finally opened his eyes and noticed that his mother was already present. She had been tied to a pole, threaded through large holes in a wooden platform positioned on the left side beneath the grandstand. A rope wrapped around her waist, and a metal chain bound her hands above her head. Kao wanted to transform right now, but he didn't know how. Lady Sarah had tried to prepare him for what might come, but the sight hit him hard anyway. He was led up the right side of a second wooden platform facing his mother, and forced to kneel before a metal stake with a ring fixed on top. Soldiers secured the wrist chains to the metal stake, then added a single jeweled collar, which they fitted around Kao's neck. The spark of hatred blossomed into a raging flame when he heard a whimper from Clara. Spear-toting soldiers surrounded them on three sides. Kao tried to ignore his mother's plight, but could think of little else. Straining against the collar, he looked at the grandstand holding the royal entourage. "What's wrong with them?" Lord Ewald grumbled the question to Lady Sarah. "The protective instincts have not yet asserted themselves, father." Her words pierced Kao's chest. Despite her warning, they still sounded like a betrayal. His gaze flew to the other platform where three soldiers lifted his mother's chin with the tips of their spears. The sharp blades opened shallow cuts at her throat. A fractional amount of pressure would kill her. Desperation consumed Kao. A strange energy filled him, making him feel like his blood had suddenly caught fire. It wasn't exactly painful, though he wouldn't call it pleasant either. He spread his arms as wide as they would go and yanked back on the chain linking him to the metal snake. It rattled, but stayed in place. Heat and pressure mounted inside him until he thought his skin would burst. He clenched his eyes shut and drew his fists in toward his chest in an effort to contain the sensation as it turned painful. He screamed. At least he tried to. What came out was a powerful screech. Ko didn't realize he was flying until he hovered 6 meters above the wooden platforms. The shock almost knocked him out of the air. He twisted his head this way and that, trying to see what he'd become. He couldn't see much, but his hands looked like an eagle's claws, his feet had the appearance of a lion's paws, and he caught flashes of a long, sleek tail with a tuft of fur at the very tip. A collective gasp drew his attention downward. His vision had improved 100-fold. He could see individual beads of sweat and tears that trickled down his mother's face. Enraged, he screeched again and dove at the soldiers still menacing his mother with their spears. At the last moment, they tried to turn the weapons on him, but Ko slammed into them with crushing force, flinging them off the platform in different directions. "Griffin!" The awed whisper reached Ko's ears as he caught his reflection in the armored breastplates as the men went flying. He felt lightheaded as a half-dozen eagle heads blinked back at him. Chapter 5. Breaking Free. The sight of his new form frightened Ko. Instinctively, he dug his claws into the wooden platform. The strong talons ripped into the soft wood. He wanted to free his mother, but he had no hands. He dared not touch her for fear of harming her. His body was too new to be trusted. Every time he tried to shout at the men to let her go, another screech split the dusty air. He fluttered his wings in frustration and scratched at the platform floor. Shock kept everybody rooted in place for a while, but as it wore away, the soldiers picked up their spears and pointed them Ko's way. "Fly, Ko," Mother whispered. "Get away." His vigorous headshake needed no interpretation. Many people started speaking at once, but one voice rang out above the others. "Submit or she dies!" roared Captain Dominic. Ko's head whipped toward the platform he'd come from. The captain stood behind Clara with one arm wrapped around her waist. The other held a sword across her neck. "No, Ko!" Lady Sarah shouted. She leaned over the railing, gripping it hard. "Fly!" Lord Awald backhanded her, sending her crashing into 2 soldiers. They caught her arms and held tight. "Hold her!" Lord Awald snapped, even though they were already doing so. "No, please!" begged Lady Awald. She addressed her husband directly. "Leave her alone!" Lord Awald glared down at his wife. "I don't know what she did, but I know she's responsible." Anger spiked inside Ko. He rose up 4 meters to get a better perspective. "Do you trust me?" Lady Sarah's voice appeared within Ko's mind, like one of his own thoughts. He jerked his head negative. "Stick to the plan. He cannot kill her, I promise." A small, frightened cry from Clara contradicted the thoughts. "Capture that griffin!" ordered the king. "But do not kill him!" The royal guards snapped to tighter attention and moved to obey their king. "Forget me. Save my mother and escape. That's all that matters. Your friend will be fine." Ko tilted his head and pierced Lady Sarah with a sharp look. "I cannot guarantee your mother's safety, but I will die protecting her." "What will it be, Griffin?" challenged Captain Dominic. "Who should die first?" The second question held a lot of mocking as well as scorn. He gestured with his sword behind Ko. Twisting his head around, Ko saw that the king's soldiers had made it to his mother. Swords and spears leveled at the captive. Every eye went to Ko, awaiting his decision. If he surrendered, he might save some of them, but he would be condemning them to permanent captivity. In the span of a second, his eagle eyes took in each person. His mother's eyes were shut, and her lips moved in silent prayers. She would tell him to escape. Clara looked frightened beyond words, but resigned to her fate either way. He knew where Lady Sarah stood. Reaching a decision, Ko released a primal war cry and dove for the grandstand. Soldiers and nobles alike scrambled backward as fast as they could. The wind from Ko's powerful wings flattened everybody in a short radius of his target, except Lady Ewald. She stood alone in the center with her arms held wide in welcome. As Ko landed next to her, she delicately climbed up to a position just behind his head, tucking her knees between his shoulder blades. "Do not fear. We will not abandon them," promised Lady Ewald. She spoke low so only Ko's keen ears could hear. "My people are coming." With a cry of rage, Captain Dominic threw Clara against the wooden piece to which she was chained. Raising his sword high, he plunged it downward at her back. Ko screeched in helpless rage, expecting to see his friend pinned to the pole. Instead, the sword rang like the captain had struck solid stone. Clara held tight to the pole. Tears streamed down her face. She blinked rapidly, and Ko saw the change in her eyes. The normal, gentle blue orbs flipped to a brilliant gold color, and the pupils lengthened into vertical slits. Next, her pale skin darkened and hardened. She screamed as the mass of her body increased 1,000-fold instantly. The wooden platform creaked and cracked under the sudden weight. Clara's scream changed pitch, deepening into a roar that shook the entire arena. The chains holding Clara snapped into multiple pieces and flew in random directions. One piece struck a soldier in the forehead, knocking him out. The wooden platform trembled, then collapsed. Clara stood up, causing Captain Dominic to slide down off her back with a terrified scream. She stalked toward the soldiers on the other platform, but they scattered like ants from a kicked hill. "Dragon!" The cry rose up from everywhere. Men shouted and hurried to form battle lines, but without proper coordination, their efforts were paltry. The king and Lord Ewald each shouted directions, often contradicting each other. A stream of fire sent the shaky lines scattering in disarray. Ko trotted over to Lady Sarah, who also climbed onto his back. The soldiers with her made no move to stop her. The sight of Clara's transformation into a blue-green dragon had stolen their bravado. The sky darkened as the arena filled with small, flying forms. The crowd murmured restlessly, hunkered down to stay out of the confrontation. "Let us go set your mother free," said Lady Sarah. Ko flew to the platform holding his mother and knelt so Lady Sarah could dismount. As she had done with the locks to their cages, Lady Sarah conquered the latches with a simple touch. Once free of the ropes and chains, Ko's mother threw her arms around his feathered neck. "We must hurry," said Lady Ewald. "The king's forces will regroup soon." Ko suddenly realized they had a problem. He could carry Lady Sarah and Lady Ewald, but beyond that, he wouldn't be able to fly. He looked to Clara, thinking perhaps she might be able to help. She could certainly bear more weight than Ko. However, she appeared less confident about flying. There was no way for an inexperienced person to safely ride her. Lady Sarah must have performed the same mental calculations, for she reached up and placed a hand on Ko's face. "You must leave me," she whispered. "No!" The protest came from Lady Sarah's mother, but Ko's heart echoed it. "I alone stand the best chance of surviving what comes," said Lady Sarah. "Ko, carry our mothers on your back." "My people can save you," declared Lady Ewald. "They cannot save us both, mother," said Lady Sarah. "Now go." She spun around and ran toward the soldiers still harrying Clara. Some soldiers finally started shooting arrows. Clara knocked an entire row of soldiers over with a sweep of her spiked tail. She then joined the battle in the sky, trading blows with the twin black dragons that had formed from royal guards. Together, she and the fire fairies fought them to a draw. Ko wanted to join the fight, but he couldn't do so and keep his mother and Lady Ewald safe. He did the next best thing and flew high above the arena. He adjusted his altitude when he saw that the battle for the sky moved quickly in his direction. "All who seek freedom should flee now!" shouted Lady Sarah. "Follow the fire fairies!" Many people fled as she suggested. Several others in the crowd jumped over the walls into the sandpit and grabbed weapons, forming a makeshift defensive line in front of Lady Sarah. A twin line of fire fairies formed and blinked in quick succession, one right after the other, literally lighting the road to freedom. Lady Sarah kept busy directing the stream of refugees into that flow. Ko saw movement behind Lady Sarah. He screeched a warning, but it got lost in all the activity. "Save my daughter," ordered Lady Ewald. Ko prepared to dive, but a stream of fire fairies fell from the sky. "Kill the rebel!" cried the king. The figure of a royal guard appeared behind Lady Sarah, paused, then pounced, plunging a small dagger into the girl's side. She cried out and fell forward into a surprised Captain Dominic's arms. The crowd of refugees closed ranks around them, sweeping Lady Sarah up and carrying her on their shoulders. A blazing wall of fire fairies formed behind the refugees. "Stand down," ordered Lord Ewald. "Let them leave." The man had fallen to his knees when he saw his daughter fall, but now he struggled to stand. "Kill them!" King Agnor shouted. "Defend them!" countered Lord Ewald. "You will not further harm my daughter, sir." "This is treason, Ewald." The men glared at each other. The two factions of soldiers formed uneasy battle lines, eyeing their commanders nervously. "So be it," hissed Lord Ewald. "The city of Oswald officially secedes. We can finish this now or later. The choice is yours." "You will regret this," cried the king. With that, his two black dragons dove from the sky to retrieve him. "We must go. There's still too much danger here, and Sarah's time is short. Only the full efforts of my people's healers can help my daughter now. I will show you the way," said Lady Ewald. Her voice was heavy with grief. Somehow, Ko knew the battle would go ill for Lord Ewald's forces if he fled. For a moment, he hovered, caught in currents of indecision. Everybody would tell him to follow the plan and go, but if he left, King Agnor would escape and return with a larger force. More people would suffer. Then again, if they didn't leave soon, Lady Sarah could die. She could perish either way. Screeching frantically to Clara, Ko dove for the ground, aiming for the area behind Lord Ewald's forces. Thankfully, their long friendship superseded words. Clara positioned herself above Ko protectively, while he gently dropped off his charges. "You be careful," his mother warned, as she slid off his back and drew Lady Ewald with her. A single, powerful bound brought Ko into the exact center of the arena. He sent out a screeching challenge that brought sudden silence to the remaining crowd. Those looking to flee paused. The men holding Lady Sarah stopped moving and arranged themselves into a tighter protective ring around her. Seeing Ko return, the king ordered his dragons to dive into the arena. "Do you mean to challenge me, boy?" demanded the king. Calming his heart, Ko willed his body to transform back into his human body. The crowd gasped. Clara bellowed in frustration. He wasn't sure he could turn back into a griffin at will, but he trusted Lady Sarah's word that he would. "I do," he answered formally. Ko knew the legend on every heart and mind as well as anybody. A captive from the Golden City would set the kingdom free. Confidence surged through him. It was like Lady Sarah's spirit joined with his, willing him to speak. "Reveal your true nature!" The king leapt down a few feet from Ko, flanked by his two black dragons who transformed into hulking men simultaneously. He laughed and leapt forward suddenly, knocking Ko back with a firm push. Ko just barely kept his feet. A dagger appeared in the king's hand. "I owe you nothing, boy, but your insolence has earned you death," said the king. As King Agnor swung with the dagger, Ko ducked and initiated the change. The blade swished overhead as his sharp beak tore into the king's ankle. The man's pained scream quickly changed pitch as he transformed into a large, powerful snake and wrapped tightly around Ko's feathered neck. The snake's bulk and sudden movement nearly snapped Ko's neck, but he tucked his powerful legs beneath himself and tore into the snake with his talons. For a wild minute, they tumbled, kicking up a cloud of dust. His talons kept it at bay, but it had a firm grip around his neck. At last, Keo shook himself loose from the snake. Suddenly, the snake went limp, slid to the ground, and transformed back into a man. He lay on his back as if asleep. Keo had no idea what had just happened. One of the large black men stepped forward, knelt, and laid a bloody dagger at Keo's feet. "You have shown him for what he is and given us courage to seize our freedom. If you will allow it, I am at your service." "I too will serve you, Griffin," said the other soldier. Keo started to shake his head, but Lady Sarah's voice once again appeared in his mind, though not as strong as before. "Clara's dream foretold this, Keo. If you do not accept this burden, a civil war will consume this land. Right the wrongs, preserve the future, become king, and they will follow you. Go to my father. He can help." Heart pounding, Keo flew into the sky, completed a quick lap around the arena, and gently touched down in front of Lord Awald, who had climbed onto the remaining platform. The man looked ashen. "I never thought I'd see this day." His voice started out hesitant and got stronger as he continued. Since everybody else hardly dared to breathe, they heard every word. "King Agnor died without an heir. As First Lord, I must take up his banner or choose a successor. Far be it for me to argue with prophecy, but you have my service as an advisor should you wish it. I'm sure my daughter will say the same." As one, the huge crowd around the arena dropped to their knees. Terrified, Keo looked to Clara. Still in dragon form, she blew a blast of fire in salute to the new king.
I hope you enjoyed listening to The Golden City Captives by Julie C. Gilbert, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Julie, go to juliecgilbert.com to find more of her books. And if you're into graphic novels, you'll want to check out her upcoming Kickstarter, which is for a superhero saga, but it will have a bonus add-on that includes the graphic novel of the story you just heard. You can either search for her name on Kickstarter or you can check out the link in the show notes. If you enjoyed listening to Paeter narrate the story, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. Last week I mentioned I had 2 ideas for how to keep the podcast running, so today I'm going to explain my second idea, which involves creating a volunteer team. Several other podcasts I know and love do this, and some grow those volunteer positions into paid positions, which would be amazing. I already have my sister-in-law volunteering her time to listen to the episodes before they go live to make sure we don't make fools of ourselves with all the words we mispronounce. You should all be super thankful that she saves you from that experience. But there are 3 other very specific tasks I'm needing help with, 2 of which require specific skill sets and one that can be done by most anyone. I'm not great at delegating, so this has been a hard one for me. But if any of these 3 things sound fun to you, I'd love to have you fill out an application for the volunteer team, which you can find at findingfantasyreads.com/volunteer. The one that most anyone can do involves pre-reading short stories for the podcast. I've mentioned this before, but finding stories for the podcast is one of the most time-consuming activities for me. I'm certain that if I had several people helping me hunt, it would make that process easier. I'm also looking for someone who enjoys the admin tasks of website maintenance, which would involve setting up the blog post and show notes each week. It requires some familiarity with WordPress and would take about an hour a week. I will admit that one of you sneaky listeners already applied for this position, so it's possible it will be filled very soon, but still worth applying because we could always split it into 2. And then I'm also looking for someone who might have interest in audio editing, which would take about 1 to 2 hours each week. If any of those sound like something you'd enjoy doing, please check out the volunteer application for more information on the roles and requirements, as well as the benefits of volunteering. Again, you can find the form at findingfantasyreads.com/volunteer. Don't forget that this month we are running a giveaway for some fantastic fantasy audiobooks and an Audible subscription. So if you want a chance to win, go to findingfantasyreads.com/giveaway to enter. As always, I will have links for all of those sites in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.